Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cavan-Smith. Tonight, the UN Secretary-General sacks the commander of the peacekeeping force in South Sudan after a damning report accuses troops of failing to protect civilians undergoing violence a stone's throw away from headquarters in Juba earlier this year. Also, Jacob Zuma turns to the courts in a bid to stop the release of a potentially explosive report into allegations of the South African president facing over corruption and about his relation to the influence of a powerful family on the government. And Cameroon's president has promised 500,000 students their own computer, an expensive scheme that's welcomed by pupils, but not so much by economists. But first, the UN's chief has sacked the commander of peacekeeping forces in South Sudan following a report that slams the UNMISS mission for failing to protect civilians from being killed and raped by soldiers on its doorstep. The UN special investigation has come down hard on troops who stood by or even abandoned their posts during an outbreak of fatal violence in Juba back in July. Peacekeepers were described as risk-averse, badly led, and poorly performing. 27,000 displaced people are housed in a UN compound in Juba, all of them hoping to escape the ravages of civil war. The report suggests that they and even some foreigners and UN staff who counted on peacekeepers' protection have not been able to do so. Jessica Lemesurier is in New York for us. She joins us now. Jessica, so this is pretty damning stuff. Tell us more about its findings.
Indeed, this report is really damning and it goes into quite some detail. It describes the leadership of the mission in South Sudan as chaotic and ineffective and says that peacekeepers were risk averse and that essentially they did little to nothing to protect civilians from being killed, raped and tortured. It focuses in particular on a period of 3 days in July during which some 73 or so civilians were killed and a few peacekeepers as well. It goes into detail about what happened in the Hotel Terrain, where some civilians and NGO staff and UN staff were trapped. They repeatedly called for help, but they did not receive help. And in the end, private contractors had to go in and rescue them. They were just fobbed off by UN staff. Now, the accusations are extremely serious and they continue on after that period of 3 days. There's one part of the report in particular that's extremely shocking that describes sexual violence, and it documents one episode in which a civilian woman was just a metre away from a UN base, a metre or metres, and that she was sexually assaulted, and that peacekeepers and UN police just stood by doing absolutely nothing.
Some really disturbing stuff there. Clearly, the UN needs to look at this. Something needs to change. The chief of UNMISS has been fired, but what else besides that is likely to come out of this?
Well, there's a call for accountability. Now there is a call for those others who did not respond within the mission to be held accountable and to be punished. Now, when it comes to individual peacekeepers, there'll now be a focus on identifying who was most responsible and on them being punished. They, of course, would have to be held to account by the troop contributing countries. So in this case, China, India, Nepal and Ethiopia, I believe. The Chinese had a particular spotlight on them, seeing as their peacekeepers were to an extent in charge of some of the worst incidents here that happened in July. Now, there's also a call for peacekeepers there in South Sudan to do more, to go out of their bases in order to protect civilians and fulfill their mandate. It is likely that there'll be a Security Council meeting later on this week to discuss all of this. That's at least according to diplomats here.
Thanks very much. Jessica Lemesurier there for us. Well, Sudan has said that it is still hoping to improve relations with Washington, even though the United States have decided to extend sanctions on Khartoum. A trade embargo has been in place since 1997, and the US believes that Sudan remains an extraordinary threat to its national security. Simona Foltin brings us more from Khartoum.
President Obama has renewed the sanctions against Sudan for at least another year, claiming that the country continues to pose a threat to U.S. national security. The move comes despite ongoing negotiations to lift the sanctions on some sectors of the economy. Obama's words also stand in stark contrast with statements made by the U.S. State Department, which praised Sudan for its collaboration to combat terrorism in the region. Earlier today, I spoke to a senior ruling party official, and this is what he had to say.
Negotiation between Sudan government and United States of America administration is continuing, and we hope that we succeed and we can persuade this United States of America administration that we are keen and we are ready to normalize relations and ties with the United States, and there is no any cause for United States of America to impose sanctions against our country and against our people.
The U.S. State Department has dismissed the renewal of the sanctions by the White House as a technical formality that could be reversed at any time in the future should certain conditions be met. But promises to lift the sanctions have been made in the past, for example, to incentivize the government to sign and implement peace agreements and to allow for the peaceful secession of South Sudan in 2011. So many here accuse the U.S. of constantly moving the goalposts. Many Sudanese also question the effectiveness of the sanctions, which have been in place for almost 2 decades. They say that it's the ordinary citizens who bear the brunt of the stifled economy. They can't send or receive money from relatives abroad or access basic goods and services. In the meantime, Omar al-Bashir and the National Congress Party, who have been running the country for over 25 years, remain firmly in power. Simona Foltin for France 24 in Khartoum, Sudan.
Well, the Nelson Mandela Foundation in South Africa has called for President Jacob Zuma to be sacked. The NMF has accused him of having failed the test for leadership. He's faced numerous scandals, and this statement was released as Jacob Zuma turned to the courts in a bid to stop the release of a potentially explosive report into allegations of corruption and looking into his relations with the influential and powerful Gupta family on the government.
Supporters of Julius Malema's EFF party protested outside the High Court in Pretoria. They are among the opposition parties challenging Jacob Zuma's attempt to block the publication of a potentially damning report for him. The report was carried out by former public prosecutor Thuli Madonsela. It focuses on allegations that the wealthy Gupta family used its close ties with Zuma to influence cabinet appointments. Zuma argued that he did not have enough time to respond to Madonsela's questions.
It's a typical Jacob Zuma delaying tactics. He knows that this is going to be bad news for him. He rushes on the last minute to do an interdict, and if he's given an opportunity, he's going to drag us into the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court until next year.
Jacob Zuma and the Guptas deny any wrongdoing. On Tuesday, the court ruled that 4 opposition parties had the right to challenge Zuma's bid to block the report.
When state capture takes place, it robs poor South Africans of opportunity. It steals away business opportunities for others. It is corrupt activity. Therefore, we mustn't define it uniquely. It is corruption.
Proceedings will resume Wednesday. Zuma, who's 74, has so far survived a string of damaging scandals. He's currently serving his second 5-year term and is due to step down in 2019.
The results from Ivory Coast's referendum over the weekend show that voters have approved a new constitution with 93.4% of the votes. However, there had been some concerns that the turnout was extremely low in the wake of a call for a boycott from the opposition. President Alassane Ouattara says the referendum's plans to ditch a clause on national identity in the constitution would help end years of unrest. The fact that Ouattara's father was born in Ivory Coast raised problems for him in his bid for the presidency. His opponents accuse him of trying to line up a successor. In the latest sign of deteriorating relations between the two countries, Rwanda has published a list of 22 French officers it accuses of having helped plan and execute the 1994 genocide. It comes a month after French investigators said that they were reopening a probe into who shot down then-President Juvenal Habyarimana's jet, which triggered the genocide in which 800,000 mostly Tutsi people were killed. That followed a deposition submitted by a Rwandan army chief who again pointed the finger of blame at Rwandan President Paul Kagame. Last month, he warned of a showdown with France over the allegations. Morocco's arrested 11 people suspected of involuntary manslaughter of a fish seller whose death sparked widespread demonstrations. Muhsin Fikri was accidentally killed on Friday in the city of Al Hoceima as he tried to protest against the seizure and destruction of his stock of swordfish. He reportedly threw himself into an operating rubbish truck in despair. Thousands attended his funeral over the weekend. Now, Cameroon's president promised 500,000 students their own computer. It's an expensive scheme that, though welcomed by pupils, is not going down well with economists. Our correspondents have the story.
On the horizon of one of Yaoundé's 7 hills, commonly referred to here as the Hill of Knowledge, since it hosts the country's oldest university. Of the 50,000 students on roll, only a handful own personal computers. This situation may soon change as since the beginning of the academic year, all the students are expecting free laptops following a decision of the president of Cameroon. Lorna is an undergraduate language student and impatiently expecting this presidential gift.
This is positive for us. As students, we are struggling. We support each other. Some students have computers, and we share them. It's difficult. Sometimes when you can't find a student with a computer, you have to go to a cyber cafe, and it's expensive.
In order to provide some 500,000 computers to all students in Cameroon universities, the government will have to contract a 75 billion francs CFA loan from a Chinese bank. This decision does not go down well with this economist and one of the most vocal opponents of this loan.
If the loan had been meant to set up an assembly plant in Cameroon, then it would have been a very, very good idea. It would have created jobs.
Purchasing computers on credit from China rather than from local dealers is a bitter pill to Cameroonian traders as they see this lucrative 75 billion francs CFA deal slipping through their fingers.
75 billion CFA is a lot of money. Imagine if 75 local vendors were selected through a bidding process. That way they would have each got $1 million turnover.
Back in the amphitheaters, the date of distribution of these 500,000 laptops is still a mystery. Meantime, students are left with no option than making use of the cyber cafes.
That's it for Iron Africa. Thanks for joining us.